Hello everyone, this is Whitney from Star Hearth Astrology, and I am here tonight to talk to you about Scorpio season, which happens between October 22nd and November 21st of 2020. So in this video, I'll be going over the major transits and kind of how they connect to what's been coming before, what's happening after, what may be happening inside of you, and what might be happening in kind of our communal context. So this can help you plan your month or study yourself in the middle of the month when things are happening, or even help you reflect on the month, listening to it post Scorpio season, kind of consolidating your experience. So with that said, let's jump right in. So I like to always start by reminding myself kind of what storylines we're already in, because obviously like everything doesn't restart as soon as the sun goes into Scorpio. If you're using whole sign houses, the sun has moved into another house in your chart. And so we kind of have another topic that's being highlighted or area of life that's being highlighted. But that can have greater or lesser significance depending on your individual chart's sensitivity to the sun, or what's your ruling planet for the year with annual perfections. But anyway, so right, we're in the middle of the cycles of all of these planets regardless. So I like to remind myself kind of exactly where we are. So where are we? Mars is still retrograde. It's been retrograde since September 9th. It's moved through, though, all of its retrograde squares to Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn. So we're kind of through the most intense part. In Libra season on October 13th, we had the Mars's opposition with the sun, which was the midpoint of the retrograde and kind of like the peak or the climax. And so, we're not out of the woods, but we're not getting deeper into it. We're kind of progressing towards the end of the retrograde. And Mars will go direct on November 13th, but it won't be until January that Mars is back out of Aries and out of the shadow of this retrograde. So we'll be still dealing with the themes of the retrograde for the rest of the year, even after Mars goes direct. So if you've been reflecting on your chart, or I know I've been giving readings, or I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so Mars retrograde. We're not done with those themes yet, but we're certainly towards the easier part. We're through the worst of it. Mercury is retrograde. Mercury went retrograde on October 13th and will be retrograde until stations direct on election day, November 3rd. And then it's still in its shadow of the retrograde until November 19th. So really throughout the course of Scorpio season, we're dealing with those themes. And Mercury stationed retrograde in Mars's sign of Scorpio. So we've kind of got a retrograde Mercury with a retrograde ruler. We don't know what to do and we don't know what to think. So that's a big part of where we are, is that we're not making forward progress because Mars is still retrograde, and we're not even sure where we're trying to go because Mercury is also retrograde and kind of frustrating, even figuring things out. We start Scorpio season with Venus in Virgo, which is the sign of her fall. And the thing that I notice consistently about Venus in Virgo is that it's really, really, really hard to find comfort when Venus is in Virgo. So the normal coping tools that you might have, or the normal kind of ways that you get through things or find comfort, is just not available. And, I think in a lot of ways, the isolation that 2020 has brought about certainly speaks to this, but I think really feeling the added stress of the Mars retrograde and the Mercury retrograde just makes Venus in her fall feel even more stark, because it's just not working to make ourselves feel better. And some of us, a lot of us are in pretty rough shape. And so that's really difficult. And we've been in Libra season, which is ruled by Venus, and Venus is kind of the most debilitated she can be. So that's rough. And then we open up Scorpio season kind of on the day that we switch from the first quarter of the lunar month into the second quarter. So we've got a first quarter moon, which kind of introduces us to the rising action of the month. We're kind of coasting on that waxing moon, and tension is building up to the full moon that happens on Halloween. And then right as we enter Scorpio season, the sun moves out of debilitation in the sign of Libra, which is the sign of its fall. So we've had the sun in the sign of its fall, ruled by Venus in the sign of its fall. So that's difficult. And then we've got a retrograde Mercury ruled by a retrograde Mars. So some pretty tough stuff that we're wrestling with coming into Scorpio season. But the good news is that Scorpio season is going to be better than Libra season, at least from a dignity point of view. Certainly, we've got all of our direct stations. So things will start picking up momentum again. And planets will get into better condition. Okay, so the main storylines that we're looking for in Scorpio season, obviously everything that moves, all of the planets that move into Scorpio. So that's going to be the sun, Mercury, kind of the context of our full moon. They are all going to have to oppose Uranus in Taurus. So that's something that we deal with kind of every Scorpio season for the next few years, and for the past several years that Uranus has been in Taurus, which it will spend a total of 7 years there. I think we're about 2 or 3 years into those 7. And so when planets oppose Uranus, kind of get surprises, breakthroughs, and breakdowns. So it's kind of a hold on to your horses energy, but also not like, by no means like not something that only happens once every 20 years or whatever. So we work through that. We have Mercury's retrograde finishes up in Scorpio seasons. We've got about half of it in Scorpio season, and then it's resolution. So it will station retrograde on the 3rd, but it's going to have to cover all of those degrees that are retrograded over again. And it won't be done doing that until November 19th, which is going to be right at the end. It's also going to retrograde back into Libra, so we'll have a little bit of Libran themes, but it's going to be a very different time in Libra because Mercury will be in Libra while Venus is also in Libra. So it's got a ruler in better condition. We have Venus in Libra, so she gains dignity really well when she moves into Libra, and we can get a little bit more of that comfort, but we are going to have to work through. As she moves through Libra towards the end of Scorpio season, she's going to square our group of kind of heavy-handed Capricornian planets, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, and also work through an opposition with Mars. And this is going to, Venus is in rulership in Libra, Mars is in rulership in Aries, Saturn is in rulership in Capricorn, so it's not, it's a fun fight to watch. I don't know, but it's happening inside of us, so it's a little intense. Then we'll have, we also have Mars's direct station to look forward to, so that happens on November 13th, right before a new moon. So I think that's going to be really powerful to have its direct station with that new moon. We've got, a kind of renewal of the lunar month, and that will happen right as Mars is pivoting and starting to move forward again. And that new moon is in Scorpio, ruled by Mars. Powerful new moon. It's also the last lunation that we have before eclipse season, which starts with a full moon lunar eclipse on November 30th. So that's significant. So we have that Scorpio new moon. We also have a supercharged full moon, which happens on Halloween, and then the new moon happens on November 14th. And as always, I release separate full moon and new moon videos that are a little bit shorter, that just focus on those moons, kind of possible rituals for honoring them, but also talking through the astrological dynamics contained within those moments. So you can check those out as well. Okay, so I always like to talk about kind of where the rising and falling action of is in the month in the context of the moon, because the moon rules our daily life and the daily details and kind of like the flavor of how we're working through. So we have the sun enters Scorpio just a day before we have our first quarter moon, bringing us into the second quarter of the lunar month. But so we've got this rising, waxing action building up towards a full Taurus moon. And then it will kind of, this inertia really pulls you down. Now we're in waning energy. So there's less of a frenzy, but there's still a lot of action until we enter the fourth quarter, which is between this quarter moon and our new moon in Scorpio. And that kind of pulls us in. We start getting sleepy. It's time to clear things out. It's time to let things go. Less and less is happening. We're super tired before our new moon. And then the energy picks up again. And we start building up towards another quarter moon, which is going to happen actually the day that the sun goes into Sagittarius. So that is technically, that Pisces quarter moon is in Sagittarius season. So how I understand this chart and where the moon is that the first half of Scorpio season is going to be a lot busier in terms of outward things happening. And then the second half is going to be a lot more internal. We're going to be sorting through that. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because we've got everything building towards a full moon on Halloween, and then we're going to have an election season right after that, and then we're going to recover from whatever happens for a week, and then we're going to have to let all of that sink in and figure out what we're doing for the future with whatever happens in election season. So I'm going to transition to talking about these transits on kind of a day-by-day basis. So you can kind of just listen to it all as a big chunk, or get out your planners and mark things down. I learned so much astrology from listening to things like this, just with my birth chart out in front of me and just kind of figuring that out. And then also, if you have, I find it's actually really helpful to not just have your birth chart, but have, some people in your family, like your partner, or people that you know really well, and kind of have a few birth charts and kind of see where it's showing up in multiple people's charts, because that starts building kind of the framework in your brain for recognizing the patterns of what's going on. Which I find like having, you've got yours, and obviously you have the most perception about your birth chart and your own psychology and what's happening in your life than you have for anyone else's. But it's good to kind of have the balance of also being able to see, it has to be someone that what's going on in their life on a daily basis. And definitely that you can ask about what's going on. But it kind of helps you have a more balanced view, or to have a more well-rounded context. I find, than just looking at your chart. Okay, so we get into the second quarter of the lunar month, when we have our first quarter moon. The moon squares the sun in the morning of, oh gosh, just one time I would really like to start recording these videos and not find a typo. Oh man. Okay, my Virgo planets are going to skewer me, but that happens on October 23rd, not September 23rd. So we've got the first quarter moon, brings us into the second quarter of the lunar month. And as I said, that is this energy that is waxing. So it's very energetic, but it's also, the moon is more than half bright. So it's pulling us into the bright hemisphere, the bright half of the month, where things become, things are building towards fruition. And so what I find is that means that there's a lot more outward action. And right, we're kind of crossing that threshold from things taking root inwardly to them breaking kind of the surface of the soil and having an outward body. But that's when I find it gets really busy, and then it kind of builds in intensity until the full moon. So this is kind of like the most frenzied week of the month. Then we have Venus trine Saturn, which I really love this aspect, because I find Venus together with Saturn to be, I don't know. I love Venus and Saturn together because Saturn can kind of help Venus be more grounded, and Venus can soften the edges of Saturn and really bring out the warmth of Saturn. And I do think that Saturn has a lot of warmth, tough love warmth, but really wants us all to be okay and not move too quickly, and, deal with how it feels to be mortal and how it feels to be bound in kind of the world of matter. And I think that even though we feel the harsh edges of that a lot, looking for the grace in those limitations helps us experience them not as so oppressive. So Venus trine Saturn, right, is really, Venus is in her fall in Virgo. So the trine is from Virgo to Capricorn. And I think that what Virgo and Capricorn really respect about each other is standards of excellence. Also, talents for planning really difficult things. And so Venus in Virgo is really good at serving. And trining Saturn, she's really kind of a handmaiden to time and to things that take time. And so this is really a day where we can make peace with, how far we've come, even if it feels like progress has been really slow. I think it's also a really good day to forgive people, situations, ourselves, because carrying around these really tense emotions and these heavy guilt, regret, shame is just not practical. It's weighing you down. It's really hard to move forward. We're all struggling to make any kind of progress in all areas of our lives right now. And so Venus can really be this, in Virgo, in this self-sacrificing way, kind of help us shed these things in order to ascend the Capricornian mountain, in order to really move forward in our lives in a really practical way. So I really love that trine, she can soften Saturn, remind Saturn that while we're being relentlessly driven forward or relentlessly held back, that there is a squishy human underneath the idea of ourselves. And then, Saturn gets transformed from the oppressor and kind of this relentless drive into the structure that allow us to stay in one piece by making things take time, or the structure of time that allows us to grow out of our grief instead of being trapped in it forever. Saturn is the Lord of time, and time is the healer. And I think that this aspect really contains that truth, that time is the healer. Okay, the day after we have Mercury conjoin the sun. So this is the midpoint of the Mercury retrograde. It's called a cazimi, and Mercury struggles. Well, all planets struggle when they're really close to the sun, because they kind of get obscured or kind of washed out by the light of the sun. But at the moment when they conjoin it, actually, then I kind of see it as like the sun shines through the magnifying glass of whatever the planet is, and we get actually a really kind of pure version of that, of whatever that planet signifies. And so with Mercury, there's kind of like the opportunity for this stunning moment of clarity in the middle of the retrograde. Now, it'll go immediately as soon as it's not conjoining the sun, then it's back under the beams, and then we lose it again, and things are confused, and we have to find our way out of the retrograde. But we kind of, if we use the metaphor of a labyrinth, we're in a maze until we get to the center, and then at the center we come to a truth, we come to the center of ourselves, and then and we gain that boon, whatever that is, that piece of information. And because it's Mercury, it usually is a piece of information or a communication from somebody. And then we still have to exit the labyrinth. So then we're back in the maze again on our way out. This midpoint will happen at about 2 degrees of Scorpio. Well, almost 2 degrees, 48 minutes of Scorpio. So if you have anything at around 2 or 3 degrees of the fixed signs, this will aspect it. So that can certainly bring things to light and activate your chart. But that also means we're halfway through the retrograde. Whoop. Okay, then the 27th, I feel like is, we get kind of our first sizable shift with 2 planets changing signs on the same day. So we have Mercury still retrograde, but it's retrograding back into Libra. So it's moving from Scorpio to Libra. So in whole sign houses, it's going to retrograde into a different house for you. It's also going from being ruled by Mars to being ruled by Venus. And on the same day, Venus moves from her fall in Virgo into rulership in Libra. So Venus gains dignity. And so now this is such a beautiful opportunity, because before, when Mercury was in Libra, we had, for the most part, Venus in Leo. So this very kind of proud ruler. And then Mercury was working through these squares with Saturn and Pluto and Jupiter, and an opposition with Mars, and really trying to negotiate and be amenable, and really encountering a lot of resistance to that from Mars, and from the giant reality check of Saturn, and just really struggling. And then, not having a ruler that could help him too much. But now Mercury gets to go back into Libra. Venus is in Libra. And so there's this moment, there's this space in which we can actually, it just feels like we can actually communicate again. We can actually give each other the benefit of the doubt again. Harmony within relationships has a chance. And so, and Mercury's still moving backwards. So, the feathers that were ruffled before, and or are, whether there are feathers or people whose feathers we ruffled, those can be smoothed out. And so we have the chance to kind of go back and make amends in a way in which things could actually work. And I think that is really nice, building towards the full Taurus moon. The peak moment happens at almost 9 a.m. On Halloween, but we'll see a very big moon in the sky on the night of Halloween and the night before Halloween and the night after Halloween. And the moon in Taurus is exalted. And now she has Venus in Libra, so she's ruled by Venus in Libra, and Venus is in her rulership, so a very happy Venus over a full Taurus moon is great for Venusian things, but I would be careful to indulge too much. That can be very Venusian, either in candy or in whatever. Because this moon happens conjunct the planet Uranus almost to the arc minute. So there are definitely tricks hiding in the treats, and they could be surprise treats. Uranus is also ruled by a very happy Venus in Libra. But, this is a really expect the unexpected full moon. And it's so interesting, right? Because it's in the day where we all disguise ourselves. And so I think people ripping off their masks or whatever it is, ripping off its mask, could, it's going to have more than its share of shock value. And some of us, that's going to hit our charts and we're going to experience that. And it could happen, in our wider context of our community or in our country. Yeah. So, it's a full moon that could be explosive, but I don't think it's going to feel as mired as Libra season has felt. And I will get into it in a more in-depth way, picking apart kind of all of the dynamics of the full moon in my full moon video. Okay, we have the sun opposed Uranus. So that happens, that can bring about shocking things with rulers, father figures, especially if we are in a solar annular perfection year. That's a really significant transit, can be a big turning point. Can kind of, Uranus can provide that kind of lightning insight that's going to affect the house where the sun is. So that's going to be wherever Scorpio falls in your chart. And that happens at about 8.5 degrees of Scorpio. So wherever that falls in your chart. Then on November 1st, we have a retrograde Mercury square Saturn. That can really kind of hard truths, hard conversations. That's really grounding. I think it's difficult. Saturn kind of wins this battle, which means kind of the heavy, hard truths win this battle. And Mercury will strive to be the negotiator of those. But ultimately, it's going to have to yield to Saturn. And so that can be a heavy, it's not a fun aspect, but I find that the work of that aspect of Mercury square Saturn can be really fulfilling, because you do Mercury with Venus in Libra can do a little bit of a better job trying to smooth things out. And so hopefully things can be smoothed if there's enough kind of honoring of Saturn in that. Then on the 3rd, on election day, Mercury stations direct. So now it stops right at about 25 degrees of Libra. So if you have anything at 25 degrees of cardinal signs, you probably can't feel it anymore because they've been so pulverized this year. Just kidding, but also not. Mercury will station direct. Spend some time there, especially if you're having a Mercury ruled annular perfection year. Look at that time can be, things can happen around there. We've got our stuff. We can start moving forward. We are out of the labyrinth at that point. But now we have to integrate what we learned and what we know from, Joseph Campbell's formulation of the hero's journey, that actually the most difficult part of the hero's journey is not, fighting all of the monsters and getting to, ultimately, the dragon or whatever needs to be overcome. The most difficult part of the hero's journey is reintegration, or integration back into the community that they left to go on their journey. And so that's kind of the task that we come to when Mercury stations direct, is now we have to integrate what we learned. And that can be difficult because often we're being asked to change things about our lives. A year ago, I learned actually at the Mercury Cazimi that I was pregnant, and that was a surprise. And, it definitely took a while to integrate that and to kind of change what things looked like moving forward. And, that was a big, that was a big thing to wrestle with. But yeah, integrating those kind of truths. That work begins when Mercury stations retrograde, when Mercury stations direct, and then you kind of work on that until it leaves its shadow, which for this retrograde happens on November 19th. Okay, so then it is going to very quickly square Saturn again. So retrograde Mercury squares Saturn. It tries to do its best, and then it's moving forward, has to do it again. So a lot of what I said about the first Mercury-Saturn square applies, only we have a little bit better Mercury. So it can be Mercury stations direct, reflects on what's going on, has the ability to focus on the future instead of worrying about the past, and so can let things go, and the communication can be a little bit cleaner because now it's focused on how do we move forward instead of how do we heal the past, which I'm a Cancer South node, so that's a heavy question. Okay, so then we hit so it's a 3rd quarter moon. We enter the 4th quarter of the lunar month, with the moon square to the sun at 7 a.m. on November 8th. Then the day after that, we have Venus opposing Mars. So we have the so we have the lovers in the sky in opposition. In rulership, Mars is still struggling because it's retrograde. The last time we saw them kind of together was in a trine when Venus was in Leo, trining Mars and Aries, and they were getting along. Mars was still retrograde. Venus is pretty pushy in Leo, or can be. So that could have been frustrating, but they were on the same page. Whereas now, Mars is in the sign of Aries, is in this is fully in the warrior energy, although retrograde, so definitely a struggling warrior. Think like trench warfare, or, Mars has been in battle for a while without making progress. So it's heavy feeling. And Venus is in Libra now, all about like reconciliation and harmony and like, let's start peace talks. And Mars is like, but I need to get you back for what you did. So that's a little bit of that tension, having kind of these dual urges towards possibly revenge with Mars retrograde, feeling beaten in some way, and Venus ready to, make things work. Then we also have the Sun trine Neptune. So in some ways we can get some kind of divine inspiration for how to make things work, or we can get a download or a delusion about what we're actually, kind of working towards and what actually matters. So that can work on that opposition a little bit. We're also, that also the Venus-Mars opposition can also put into tension what we want, Venus, with what we're actually capable of getting, Mars. Then the next day, Mercury moves into Scorpio again. So Mercury in Scorpio is piercing. Makes a fantastic researcher, but it's very suspicious. So there can be a little bit of, Mercury in Scorpio is a spy and a scholar that gets really deep into things. So that can happen. It's also, if you use whole sign charts, moving into a new house, bringing that kind of focus into a new house. A couple days later, we have Jupiter conjoined Pluto. This is significant. This is the third of 3 conjunctions that they've had. The first one was on April 4th. The second one was on July 12th. No, was on June 31st. Anyway, the last day of June. And what I thought was significant about those is that we saw kind of peaks in COVID happen around those times. And so I think we will see that as well. I've heard that, we, with a lot of the predictions, that there will be 240,000 people dead from COVID by this week in November. And so that's kind of, Jupiter and Capricorn conjoining Pluto, they spread bad things very quickly. So that is not meant to scare you or be doomy, but just to provide that kind of, this is possibly what we could see. So, emotional equilibrium. And obviously if someone really close to you is dying, you're not going to be having emotional equilibrium, and you shouldn't be. But we use this stuff to steady ourselves. Then on the 13th, Mars goes direct. So Mars has been retrograde for 9.5 weeks since September 9th, and finally it stations on the 13th at 15 degrees of Aries. So if you have anything in 15 degrees of cardinal signs, it'll get activated by this transit. Mars is finally going to pause there for a little bit and then start moving forward and making its way out of Aries. But it's still going to have to work through squares with Jupiter and Pluto, and it would be Saturn, except for by the time it gets to Saturn, Saturn has already moved into Aquarius. So that square, their final square, actually happens in the sign of Taurus and Aquarius rather than Aries and Capricorn. So then we'll have a new moon, so the renewal of the lunar month will happen on the night of November 14th. that night the sun will sextile Pluto and Jupiter, so that means that the new moon will be sextile to Pluto and Jupiter, so that's integrating the weight of that transit. But it's the beginning of the integration, so we won't know exactly what that looks like, but it's almost like the sun will come to an accepting of the truth of what Pluto and Jupiter and their dance has been bringing to us. And with COVID, I feel like that could be fairly heavy, but we're warriors. We've made it this far through 2020, and we'll do this part together too. And I will release a longer video on the Scorpio new moon as well. Then the next day, we've got Venus square Pluto. So that will also be part of the energy of the new moon. And it will square Jupiter as well. So that's going to be, again, this cardinal tension that we're feeling between Libra, which can reconcile things, which can have peaceful negotiations, and Capricorn, which is really pushing an agenda. Venus square Pluto can activate your trauma around relationships. It just can. And Jupiter is just going to make it all that much bigger. So this is a day, we're still early in the lunar month. There's not too much energy in it. It's still quite peaceful. So hopefully just like lying low and these things happening on the edge of your awareness, because you're still kind of in the unconscious fog of the new moon. But hopefully that doesn't lead you to behave unconsciously, because Venus square Pluto can get quite upsetting for everyone involved. Okay, and then we work into the final week of Scorpio season. We have the sun sextile Mercury opposes Uranus. So this is the third of three. We had the first on October 7th, the second on October 18th, and then they've come into this opposition one more time. So this is kind of like the shocker piece of news that comes out, but it might just be, you learn something on the 7th, you learn more about it on the 18th, you finally get the last gem of information on the 17th. Or, you know what, you don't have Mercury activated in your chart, it's not aspecting anything. This whole transit goes by and you don't really notice it. That can also happen. Then on the 19th, we've got a number of things happening. We've got the sun sextile Saturn, while Venus squares Saturn, and Mercury leaves its shadow. So we're done with kind of whatever the Mercury retrograde was about for us. It has left its shadow. Hopefully we've integrated that. We've, learned that new piece of information. We've changed some part of our lives or our communication in some small way, and we are moving forward. We've got Venus square Saturn. That's hard, talk about tough love. Venus square Saturn is tough love. It's loving and it's heavy-handed. The sun is going to make that a little bit gentler by understanding that for like the highest good or the greatest good, for us, we need to handle the way things are. But it could be a little bit ouchy on your heart with that Venus square. Then on the 21st, which is the very last day of Scorpio season, we have Venus go into Scorpio that morning. So she moves from the sign of her rulership into the sign of her detriment. But, we've got, in the sign of her detriment, she gets a little bit suspicious in Scorpio. Suspicious, possessive, jealous. But it can also feel really good to be loved by Venus and Scorpio because they're quite fixated on you. So Venus can get a little fixated. The sun moves into Sag, and we've got a whole new set of adventures. And the moon is in Pisces, which brings us into the second quarter of the lunar month. So we kind of get the loud version starting first. And so Sagittarius season will be quite exciting this year. We've got eclipses, we've got Saturn changing signs, we've got Jupiter changing signs. We've got kind of, just a bunch of pivots happening that's really going to change the feel of what's going on. So I hope you will join me for my discussion of Sagittarius season, which I'll release when we get closer to that. Thank you for watching this so far. If you enjoy these videos, please like, and if you want to see more of them, hit subscribe. Here's our quick recap again. Move forward, it's busy. We build to that very exciting full moon in Taurus on Halloween. Goes down. We've got Mars stationing direct right before the Scorpio new moon, and then we start picking up energy again, but the sun moves into Sagittarius, and we are done with Scorpio season. So always, I will release videos for the Taurus full moon, which looks like this, and the Scorpio new moon on November 14th. Thank you for watching so much. I wish you a wonderful, deep, renewing Scorpio season. Let me know how it goes. Let me know how the transits are working in your chart, what you're noticing. I'd love to hear from you. Okay. Goodbye.